We'll start this, call the meeting to order, this special meeting on September 26th. And we do have a quorum present. Trustee Pearson is
a few minutes away.
Okay. Oh, she's on her way here though?
Yes.
Okay. And then, so we do have a quorum, so we'll just go ahead and get busy with the agenda. So the next item is approval of agenda items.
I move we approve the agenda.
I second.
The motion has been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we will jump right to action item number 3, the continuous improvement plan. Anita, I believe this is all yours.
Yes. Hopefully, from our meeting last week, it seems like it was longer ago than that, but it was just last week. We went through all of the documents for our continuous improvement plan, and I went through very carefully and tried to make every single change that we talked about during that meeting. And I also, in removing, will increase from the prior year from one of our metrics in those different locations, and removing some metrics and adding in the 2 replacements for LEP. I also found 2 errors that I corrected, and that was actually, they were right in one document, wrong in the other, and so I just made sure they matched to our actual correct data. But everything is squared away and ready to go. I'm glad to take any questions you have on those 3 documents.
I don't have any questions.
None for me either.
I don't either. I think you did everything what they asked. Appreciate it.
We're going to draw this out a little bit longer though.
We only have 3 minutes.
This is going way too smooth. Way too. Okay.
I move to approve the continuous improvement plan.
I second.
All right. Motion has been made by Trustee Simpson to approve the continuous improvement plan. It's been seconded by Trustee Taylor. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, we'll move to the next item, and just before we jump right in there, I apologize. We have excused Dr. Russell from this meeting. I think he is on his way back, hopefully in good spirits.
Well, did he say one?
They did. They took care of Wisconsin fairly easily.
And welcome, Assistant Superintendent Yarbrough. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
All right, it is all you guys. Facilities Committee. We get visuals with this one.
You do get visuals. Tracy doesn't come without visuals.
Well, so thank you for the opportunity today, Board of Trustees, to come in and give you just some information and also the opportunity to ask some questions on the pre-bond planning that we had discussed earlier. Tracy Rickler is here with us, and we appreciate him coming into town to be here and just to be a support for us. So I'm going to give him the floor for the time being, and he has some things. And again, as you have questions, we're really hoping that you would ask those questions in this process. It's really kind of what we're here for, is to see that and give you answers that you need. So I'll turn the time over to Tracy.
Okay. Thank you, Courtney. Thanks for letting me come today and present to you. First of all, let's preface this with, this is an if you do this scenario. Okay, this isn't committing anybody to anything, but I just wanted to take you through a process of what pre-bond planning would look like for a district like Nampa to, if you were to go after any sort of a funding mechanism for a capital improvement plan. Okay, so I just premise it like that, just to tell you that there's no commitment here to anything, other than kind of take you through some things. So what I want to take you through is education versus advocating, okay? Creating the message, delivering the message, and a timeline behind it. And part of it is, you probably know some of this, but I really do think it's a really good idea to get on public record that we do understand what the Idaho Code says around pre-bond planning for a school district, because there are rules that we should follow. And I think there are rules intended to protect school board members, district employees, and certainly the citizens who help support a bond program like this. So it really does define what advocating means versus campaigning. And I think that's what Idaho Code does for us. Advocating does not mean providing factual information about a ballot measure and the public entity's reason for the ballot measure stated in a factual and neutral manner. So when we talk about bond planning, we really are talking about advocacy. We're not talking about going out and saying, you have to vote yes or no. We are really advocating for why a program like this could be important, okay? And so the factual information is things like cost. What's it going to cost the taxpayer to do something like this? What's the intended purpose of why you're doing this? What's the condition? And we've talked about condition plenty in your guys' district, so we got that one down. But really, and then about date and location and how people get registered to vote, and those kind of things that are good for the election process. And also remembering that within the Idaho Code, that use of school property, resources, time, when resources mean money too, and time to prepare and disseminate election advocacy materials. You cannot do any of that. And so as a school board, those dollars have to come from a different funding source. That if there are opportunities to do this, it has to be, it doesn't, and there's some rules around it too. But if you're going to do any advocacy, it can't happen. We can't throw a rally in the school district, in the district office here. Okay? So that first thing is that, education versus advocacy. But I wanted to actually get in a little more about what that does mean and get some facts behind it so we do know, where our rules lie. And it says, first of all, may employees or board members work on the campaign during working hours. And it's very clear. District may not use any school resources, time or property, including employee work and time, to advocate for one particular side of a bond or not. Okay, so that's not allowed. As a salaried employee, and then this becomes a question, and a salaried employee, because this goes all the way down to your teachers, which is, as you go down, the majority of the majority of teachers, certainly have hourly staff out there and that. But administrators will be viewed as representing the district at all time. Therefore, they should never engage in campaigning and should limit all communication regarding the bond or levy to information only. And so, staying within the parameters of the Idaho Code, one of the important parts of pre-bond planning is to provide messaging so any district employee stays on the advocacy side, not on the campaign side. And I think that's really, really critical. We want people to make the decisions based on the information we can provide them, and not from somebody with what looks like they're trying to influence. And so the influence is really through information and advocacy. Now, employees or board members of the district serve on an election advisory or an advocacy committee. So a lot of times what we might call, they oftentimes are called political action committees, PACs, that help put these together. And always keep in mind that, Idaho nor any other state would never allow for constitutional rights of employees or board members to be prohibited. And so you do have the right to serve on election advocacy committees or in their individual capacities on your own time. And that service can't be prohibited. But it's usually a good idea that board members in district level administration do not serve on these committees, just as a good, safe measure. It's a level of separation, but it doesn't say you can't. Okay, and so I think any good pre-bond planning person would tell you as a board, you can't stay on the advocacy level, and that's where you stay. And just and be information resources and listening to information. And let's keep it at that level. It makes a clear line. Because I do think that this does happen, that that board members or administrative level, cabinet level people have a good intention of going to a meeting as an advocate for their school district. And it's not ill-intended, but there's too much gray area in there. And so let's just make sure, and again, that will be up to you as an individual and as a board. May employees of the district contribute to an advocacy fund? Again, you can't take away the constitutional right for anybody to contribute to an advocacy effort. That is your right as a citizen. So long as no public funds, property, or resources are used. Okay, and so again, and those are pretty easy to draw the line on, and so we can help with that too. And again, same with employees and board members should likewise be allowed to contribute to individual charities and capacities. That's your prerogative as a citizen as you go forward. Now, may the district provide information to students? Now, this is an interesting. You see that kind of middle line. There's some blurred lines in here. And although the district may not use public funds, property, or resources to advocate, simply providing factual information such as brochures is permissible. So fact sheets and making sure that the students are even informed you can do that. District should take all precautionary measures to ensure the brochures include only factual information. Once again, And again, this is where it's good to kind of stay away from, letting kind of pre-bond planning separate from you. Is that it's easier, for instance, it's easier for someone like me to come into your district and see what's factual versus campaign, mostly because I don't have a vested interest in voting in Nampa, because I don't. I don't live here, so I won't vote here. So and I'm going to say more of an outside party to do something just like that. And so, but it says can include factual information in any manner, which does include making it available on campus. So, things like you have a Christmas concert. Can you put a brochure out that's advocating for, improved fine arts spaces? Absolutely. You can show the benefits of what those can do. But you can't say that that's the reason you should vote yes for this. There's a clear line there. Okay? And so, and can the election committee meet on school facilities? No, absolutely not. No, and that's any school facility. So I don't care if they're meeting on the football field. They can't meet there. Okay? So, again, just keep it, and the safest course of action is always to meet elsewhere. And what are the penalties? And everybody should probably know these because there are consequences, and they do have consequences. There are civil penalties. That they're very close to the open meeting laws you guys have to follow anyway. Violations are monetary, obviously, and if there's prior violations out there. And again, the civil penalties, and I think, and you may know more than this than I would, whether the civil penalties go to you as an individual or it could go to apply to your board too. So I think that either way, as a representative of the board, we kind of follow these rules to avoid any kind of misinformation out there.
I think what he also wants to update you on is if there is advocating and someone can prove it, it also validates the bond election.
Correct.
If it's a staff member or a board member.
Yeah.
And I think that is something to also understand, because if someone is advocating, not educating, there could be that sort of consequence, and that's a lot of work. Making sure you're educated.
So I think, and again, I think there's where being able to separate it from you is just a good idea. Those are just good practices. Frankly, for any elected official, regardless, school board member or whatever, I just think it's good practice. So kind of what's that look like then?
Can you jump back one slide? Does that include school facilities? Does that include charter schools, private schools?
I would actually have to look at that.
I can answer that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So charter schools have different rules because they also fall under the nonprofit law.
But don't they fall under the NSD?
No, because
those that fall under NSD.
Charter schools cannot bond out for facilities, so they have to fundraise. They don't have the ability to, even if the board wanted to. That is one of the laws that they put into place for charter schools. They have to find their own funding that won't impact the taxpayers.
So the answer is yes.
Charter schools do not have to follow it, because if they're fundraising.
So if someone wanted to hold a meeting at a charter school here about this and advocate, they could.
Right. Or for their own school, yes.
And my guess, a private school would be the same.
Exactly.
Because it's not a public entity.
Right.
If they allow I want to say the yes vote and then the no vote, right? The two different votes. If you allow one, you have to allow the other.
Even if Nampa School District authorizes a charter,
That's correct.
still they can?
Because it's not a district-owned property.
So anywhere about,
Pardon?
anywhere about.
Yes.
So, how do you get started? First of all, you have to kind of look at a process overview. One of the first steps, obviously, is that there has to be some sort of a group or funding mechanism that goes in place to provide funding for a bond campaign, and it can't come from you. So the typical avenue is a political action committee, and again, PACs have this kind of connotation to them, but we don't think of them. We don't think this is more of a group that is, this would be like a friend of Nampa Schools. That's kind of what a group like this would be called. So you have to identify a community leader to chair a committee like that would be willing to, be the face of that group that is advocating for, leading a bond committee out there. that is, helping do fundraising, to do those kind of things, that really is in the position of being able to know people, see people, have access to people, because you want to get, this is a group that wants to get to all citizens across your community. And so you're looking for somebody who is that kind of cheerleader for the school district in there. To establish a community bond committee is really important. You get a representative group from across your district, and across the city, not your district, but across the city, that represents the community as a whole. And so part of that leadership role is to ensure that you're finding that groups that are all represented throughout the city. The PAC has to do fundraising. There's no way around that. Identifying parties interested in financially supporting, what Nampa schools can be in the future. And again, it's from a standpoint of that financial support is for bond camp, is for the pre-bond planning. It's not for a yes/no vote. It's things like it costs money to print brochures. It costs money to get social media blitzes out. It costs money to get those kind of, op-eds, to get TV spots, those all cost money to do. And so there has to be some sort of a funding mechanism that is not driven to the school district at all.
And remember, if you're doing educational brochures or social media, like, remembering that the election date's coming, or even if you use your automated system, as long as it's education and informational, the district can do that.
So, and this partially pays, and this partially helps pay for, again, you'll need public relations people. They know how to do graphically design this well, how to message, how to keep it in an education voice instead of a yes or no voice. And so those are things that dollars have to be, like any campaign. You guys have been through campaigns, you're obviously elected officials, so you know the rules around that too. The step around creating a message, and I'm going to talk about creating that message here in a minute, but using resources already created. You already have the tools here to create the message. You've gone through, on the facility side, you've gone through an assessment, you've gone through an adequacy evaluation, you've gone through a facilities master planning process. So you've got some tools already in place to help you shape the reason and the education behind you. And there's certainly other tools we can use. Your continuous improvement plan, all those kind of things need to be kind of brought into this. So you're not starting from scratch when it comes to your messaging at all. And then there's advocacy and getting the education out, getting the message out and informing the community and the benefits of a capital program and what that does to you. And those are done through community gatherings, social media, open houses, coffee talks. Again, as long as they're educational, just coffee talks, traditional media, op-eds, TV coverage, print media, all of those things go into this. And it's a pretty extensive process. And look, it's no secret that if the idea is to go all bond, that's the 66% threshold is a difficult threshold, and there's just no question behind that. And so that takes a concentrated effort in all of these different avenues of messaging that not everybody has a single specialty in, and so it will take a team to get this done and to get it done well.
The first one there, sorry,
No, you're fine.
creating a PAC. I'm familiar with PACs, chaired a PAC before, but does this one specifically have to be someone as far as chairing the committee from Nampa? Because it says identify Nampa community leader to chair the committee. Is that just good practice?
Again, I don't think it does, but I do think it's good practice. I think somebody from Nampa that is out there, that has connections in Nampa to the business community, to social community, sure, to the philanthropic community, to the ecumenical community.
Makes sense.
Makes sense. I do not think there's any sort of rule around. And actually, there isn't, because I know plenty that have.
I would say I would probably refer some of this to legal, always moving forward, because we do have 2 pending lawsuits against Bear Lake School District and Salmon School District for
this particular.
Correct. Because they were saying that this was advocating versus educating. And so just making sure that legal counsel is supporting your steps moving forward on those, just because we do have 2 pending in the state.
And any association like Nampa Education Association cannot be involved with this as far as
They can choose to do that if they want.
they can choose to do that, but as far as the organization itself, can they?
It could.
Well, I
right?
think they could because it depends on how they vote or what they decide to do.
As far as
So
the
their
PAC goes.
members can choose and vote to do.
So
What
long
they
as,
want,
so long
yeah.
as their members don't do anything on school time, all those things
Yeah.
that, but yes, as an association,
Yeah.
As an
going back to
association or
that
as a
constitutional
PAC.
right, they
Yeah,
can do
yeah.
that.
They can
During
register
the-
as a PAC.
yeah.
just
Correct.
then-
That's,
Hey, Tracy, who's typically in charge of selecting the political action committee, selecting that
committee.
leader? Yeah.
Typically I'd leave that to the PAC. Again, there should be a clear separation there.
Yeah, you don't get to
Yeah.
get to chair of the PAC.
Or be a part of it. Well, and here's the thing, it does, again, the code, again, always, I agree, the legal counsel is always the first step in anything you do. But there's nothing to say you can't be on a committee like that. You can't serve in a board capacity on that committee. Because they cannot take that right away from you. That's clear. But again,
But there's a big but.
but I would, most like any, probably even attorney would tell you, the clearer your separation, the better. No question. And even on the education, advocacy, and going and asking, I think those. And so again, part of the messaging is the speaking points to keep you on the education side. And because there are, and I am sure, I'm sure there's been many occasions where school district officials or board members were not intending to say, go, yes, vote for this. But the way the message was delivered came across like that. And so you just, again, you do have, when you get in this, obviously in any sort of capital or bond plan program, your attorneys become very important to this. It's a piece where you learn why you have attorneys, and they are very helpful in this. You also have great professionals. Your FA knows the laws on this, and so you've got a bunch of support behind how to keep it clearly separated in the two. Now, creating the message, I think that there's messaging topics out there, but I believe, and I've always believed this, and to a point where facility master plans that could create in the process that we have created have been very successful in the past. But they're typically not around dollars, and they're typically not around facilities conversations. Bonds are passed on student outcomes and the benefit to your students and the educational process and why it benefits the education of students. There are, and again, times have changed and times get the way they are, where finances do come into play. And you guys, as a board, will make decisions on if you go, when you go, and how much you go. That's still right in front of you. But what I would suggest is when you communicate, the message has to be very clear and concise, and it can't be confusing. And so typically, when we're looking at this, there are going to be three major topics on education. What are the educational outcomes? And what are the facts behind educational outcomes? How are our students' educational experience improved? And how do they achieve better because of this? And you do that through, good programmatic discussions. Early childhood. Are there benefits to early childhood in the plan that you're creating? The facility master plan actually does talk about early childhood. Career pathways, career and technical education. It happens to talk about that one too. Talking about athletics, talking about fine arts. The full student experience. You could throw special education here. We have provisions in there for improved spaces across the board for that. And so when we're talking about academic and outcomes, we're talking specifically about educating how these programs are improved through better assets and resources. And so, again, I've always said it, that a facility plan can't solve everything, although people tend to get a facilities plan in that umbrella for some reason. But what a facility plan can do Is it going to provide the resources and tools for success? And that's the key here. But if your bond, if you decide to go after a bond someday, if it's not focused on academic outcomes, and it's just focused on the financial impact and how I'm going to make a building better, then you will have an uphill climb. No way around it. And if you look across the state and look at the messaging across the state of the bonds that have failed recently, they're around capacity, they're around growth and enrollment, and probably about somewhat of their facilities. But it is hard to find advocacy and education on how it benefits the outcomes of children. And so if this isn't about that, I would suggest that you think about a bond another time. And but that message has to be very clear. And the other two become ancillary to it. But they're still very important messages around facilities. Talking about the efficiency of facilities and your capacity and utilization of facilities is really, really important. That the idea that I can do some reduction of your portfolio and improve the educational experience. That there's equity across the adequacy of your facilities. That I have opportunities in this plan that every high school has an auxiliary gym, every high school has a theater, every high school, just so that equity across the board, because facilities don't provide the equity yet. And also the condition will matter to a point where you can show graphics and you can show things very clearly that if you don't invest in your facilities, that there will be long-term consequences to that.
See, I'm glad you brought that up because that's what everybody sees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so to change, because I mean, when I first got into this role, that's what I'm looking at too, is what we can see and what people complain about or talk about when they park at Nampa or they can't park at Nampa or whatever the case might be.
Mm-hmm.
But to focus on the academic outcomes, that's a trickle-down effect for everything else. Focus on the student. Mm-hmm. Focus on why if we choose to go this route, why would it be best to have a new high school or a new elementary school or whatever, and really get down to the nitty-gritty. I think of Sherman and the technology that's used in that facility and how that affects student outcomes. Do we need that in every one of our elementary schools? I love it. I'm glad you brought that point up, because it helped me refocus on the students.
Yeah. It seems to me that whatever message comes out, it has to be directly related to the mission and vision, which really talks about the students, not about the schools or this bathroom needs a little bit up, So that's going to be kind of tricky, I think, because it's to my mind as the message has to be worded right.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, I think of it like this. I think academic outcomes is the headline. I think the bylines are facilities and financial information.
And people will get that too.
Well, they do, because I do think that people are concerned about costs. I think they're concerned about how much it'll cost them. And, what is the length? How long do I have to pay for this? Still people do think about their checkbooks. And so we do have to make sure that those, and again, the messages are clear and concise. We're not going to create a 12-page workbook on the ins and outs of educating your citizens on what this will do. But if you keep it on that kind of pathway, I think that the messages can become clear. And so, today we met with career tech, and we met with fine arts, and we met with athletics, and we talked about where in this program do you see your benefits? Where do you see academic outcomes because of what this plan says? We met with them on that today, because that was a more important message than, Skyview, right now it says you're going to get a new theater. That, to me, that's not the message. The message is talking to fine arts to say, that equity across the district, that everybody has a fine arts experience from, and they talked about orchestra rooms, and they talked about even early elementary, making sure those rooms are equitable across, and we've got plans for programmatic improvements across it. That's what they're focused on. And so when we get to that academic outcome, we know that your fine arts people can talk to academic outcomes. They can't talk to construction, and they can't talk to finance. And so, again, I think this is a really important thing to think about. and should be the direction that I would think that most school districts should be focused on, is academic outcomes, even in a capital program, and especially in that. So in messaging strategies, I do think that, there are fact messages, quick bullet points of education, focusing on the three messages: academic outcomes, facility improvements, finance 101. You do this through good print, social media, banners, displays, videos, op-eds, all those kind of things that really are, that people can understand and read quickly. And again, both are important. Both are important. People, if they want to do a deeper dive on something, they'll ask you, what does that mean? They'll go into it and they'll say, what do you really mean by academic outcomes? And then we can, if they want to know that, we'll give them that message. But if we can give it to them and so they understand it, and understand it clearly and efficiently, and they don't have to do the deep dive, I think people would be good with that. But then there are some people that want to look. They're going to say, well, then let's go to number 2. Let's go to your facilities improvements that do that. Let's go to financing that does that. And I think that it gives you the opportunity to let people go to any depth they choose to go to. You don't force that depth on the voter out there or the person that wants to know. You allow that to happen in there. You do it in community gatherings, and these are specific gatherings: open houses, athletic events, fine arts events, student groups. Those kind of things that, again, staying within the proper parameters of the law, but doing off-school site public gathering venues, booths and displays that the PAC staffs and can educate people. Advertising, sponsorships, PACs can do those kind of things that allow them to be very visible in their education of what a capital program does for the district. The media, using different media platforms. Certainly social media is obviously a big thing, but social media is not free. Not in campaigning, not in advocacy or education either. That you want to make sure that the message is getting out there. I know that as in my business, that if we're going to I was at a big school conference in Texas for 9,000 attendees, that you just don't hope you put it on LinkedIn and somebody's going to look at your LinkedIn. That we send it out to districts and we send it out to, and those cost money to do. And so, again, understanding the types of social media you want to be on, whether it's Facebook or Instagram, LinkedIn, Snapchat, all of the things that are out there for you that allow this to happen. Looking at local and regional newspapers, those are still relevant to have that message in there and visible. Using videos, op-eds are really good. I wish I could have linked this in, but I couldn't figure out a way to link in on LinkedIn to my presentation. But there's a school district in Ohio that I've worked with on 2 capital programs, and this time with the current climate of economics and the rising cost of housing, like it is everywhere else, people are worried about that tax rate compared to their house rate, which you guys are going to be worried about in November, again, when you guys see your new assessment come out. So they've done this 3-part series, and it's called Fun with School Finance. And TJ Cusack is their chief facilities officer, and he's very personable and people understand. And so they're doing little skits. Like one of them is they're all sitting around after the weekend and talking about, one of them bought a new house. Well, aren't you worried about the cost of that house and what's going to be in your taxes? And there's TJ walking around. Well, let me tell you about school taxes. And everybody kind of skirts around and doesn't want to listen, right? But then he goes into a real simple explanation about the rising cost of houses compared to your tax rate. And it's a very simple explanation from TJ. And it's an education piece. But it's very effective. I will tell you it's very effective because once you start to watch it, you're like, I do want to know that.
See, I'm picturing Schoolhouse Rock.
It's those
we
kind
all
of
remember that.
Yeah. If you can, the doodlegrams now, the doodle ones are very popular. There was a district up in Kodiak, Alaska, where the students did a 15-minute video on their facility and walked through it on that. So it was a YouTube. It ended up being very persuasive. They did it on their own. They weren't asked by anybody to do it, but they knew that it depended on their people voting for it. And the students took it in their own hands and said, we're going to show people what it's like to be in a school like ours. And so there's all kinds of avenues to use. And again, we follow within the parameters of what you're allowed to do. But I also think there's personal encounters, and those personal encounters matter. When it comes to your government, social groups, teachers union, philanthropic organizations, all of those are important to get a touch point to. And because I think that, one I always specifically point out is that, the teachers' union is impacted by a capital plan. Boy, they really should be included in your conversation. They're your staff. They're the people on the buildings. They should be a part of this. And so how do you bring them to make sure that they know what's going to happen and how it's going to impact their organization? Those are great things to be thinking about. But those are real touch points. Those are definite. I'm going to be right here talking to you face to face. And so it is speaking of engagements. Again, more advertisements, sponsorships into their organizations to say, can I have an opportunity to come and, at the Kiwanis group and talk about the educational outcomes of what a capital plan looks like? And can we do it that way? And so I think those personal encounters really do matter in a pre-bond planning effort. And then finally, timeline. And I think this is really important because, again, large assumption. So put it on any timeline continuum you want. But if March is a day, or if it's November, just put it in any context you want. Okay, but I was looking at March to say, okay, if we're sitting here in the middle of September, end of September, 1st of October, what does that look like? And so October, sometime around October, the board looking to say, we're thinking about going after this. Now, I think the board has a couple steps in this. And again, it's not to paint anybody in the corner because you can do this anytime you want. But the couple steps are, if, when, and how much. Okay? So your if is, does a capital improvement plan and the facilities master plan make sense enough to start asking, do we need funding for it? The next one will be, and you probably have to wait on this, is to see what it means to you, because those assessments come out in November. We don't, when you're financial advisor, I watched the presentation that he did, you're kind of in this kind of middle ground right now where you're not exactly sure what a mill means, or what your debt capacity is going to be, or what the evaluation of your district looks like. And so you're in this kind of timeline to say, well, we may decide that we really are thinking about going after a bond, but we don't know when and how much yet. Because, I think his range was somewhere between 160 and 170 million without raising taxes. Well, when the new assessment comes out, is it 180, 190 without raising taxes? Or does my debt allocation allow me to borrow more or less at a better rate or over more time to keep the dollars so I can keep it within the threshold of what my voters could support? You guys have a lot to think about in that timeline, but here's what starts to happen, is that I don't think that can be answered. And again, you can tell me better than you will, because as board members, but without that information in November, it'd be hard to make a decision like that, I would think. But if that's the case, then if November is a timeline and March, and let's say it's the first Tuesday and after the first Monday in March, well, I guess this year was like the 8th, so we'd have to look at that March calendar. But if it's the beginning of March, you've already crunched that down to a late November, early December, 2 weeks in December. Let's just count on 2 weeks in December, right? And then let's count on a half week off in that first part of January. All of a sudden, you're January, March, February, and you're at that kind of election time if it's March. And again, in between, you can see that top where the advocacy outreach, social media blitz. And you see how the line goes down to a date, but across the line also, is that oftentimes pre-bond planning is about crescendo, is about how do I get it to the loudest and best message, kind of when I need it, when's the right time to peak a message? Because if I get it too early, I might not be able to reach that election date where I need to, or if I do it too late, did I get enough people that were educated enough to vote for this? And obviously, part of that early outreach, advocacy outreach, is because I think this is my personal opinion. I think the responsibility of any PAC is to get people to register to vote. I think it's to get people in the democratic process, and so that should happen early. When you want to register to vote, and every state's different on how much time you have to register. Some you can just show up. Some you have to. It's a couple months, and so. Part of that advocacy outreach would have to start in that late November. And I actually think the easiest pathway to do that is through social media, because you can have everything queued, you can have everything ready to go, and might have some tweaking and messaging, depends on the decisions of the board. But then you can hit buttons fairly quickly to push out as quickly as you can. What takes time is print media, banners, fact sheets, posters, those kind of things that are great to put out at events. And during the holidays is a great time because people are at events. So that's the time crunch that you find yourself in if that November timeline comes into play about your decision of when and how much, which likely will be that decision point. Or you might find, once again, that that November message isn't something you want to do in March then. And that could be a right decision too. Depends on the message that you get or the data that you get. But what I wanted to show you is that if you're talking about a timeline of events, you can see how quickly, and again, part of the art of pre-bond planning is the length of time. Is, you know, the education and advocacy for whatever you're trying to do versus the opposition voice that comes out to this. Because there's always going to be opposition. There's never ever been an election that nobody voted no. Okay, and so that's the fact of the matter. That's how elections go. And you could put together the best plan whatsoever, and people will just simply vote no on it. And look, so we know that, but you want to make sure that the education is enough for those no votes to really say, and again, the education isn't focused on a yes/no vote, but it's really educating to understand why we're doing it. Okay, and even if your vote is no, this is still why we're doing it. Because, again, you have to give opportunity to both, yes and no, and we should.
What about backing up before that step and just putting some feelers out in the community to see what their threshold might be?
That's a tough one. I mean, I think that's a tough one. I think that would be outside your purview to do. Again, this is a definite attorney question, but that is definitely kind of outside your purview.
That is definitely kind of outside.
And I would say that, yeah, I would say that I wouldn't do it. I would just say I wouldn't do it.
I would add, when you guys are taking action if you were to choose to run a bond election, like you have to approve a bond resolution, which includes the proper language.
Right.
You'll probably get feedback during public input or via email like you usually do.
Yeah, I get that. I was just wondering if there was some way to kind of preempt or at least kind of take the temperature of.
And I think this is tough because I think that, you know, when we did Boise's last master plan, you know, it went out for almost $180 million, something the state of Idaho has never seen. We got 87% yes vote. 87%. That's a crazy number. If we asked for 220, would we have gotten 70% and been able to impact more educational outcome? Maybe. And so what if I lost 15% of the vote? If I got 70 and I was able to build another elementary school, you know, or create better work at school environments or equity across the district with that extra $30 million. But it was tough because, again, climate, your whatever the political makeup of your area matters. Certainly, we all know that. I mean, we're not immune to that.
Right.
But you know, there are states that tend to go more conservative when it comes to that. I can look at the state I grew up in Indiana and Texas and Florida, tend to lean on the conservative side in the ask. And again, most of it is around, you know, sensitivity to tax impacts. Mm-hmm. I mean, citizens across this country, regardless of where you sit, really feel like that economic pressure of taxes. And they're understandable. Most people understand why we have taxes. And I would say everybody understands why we have them, but it doesn't mean you have to like them. But I also do think that had we had a better avenue for the ask, I think Boise could have went for more. But that's hindsight. And they're doing pretty well within their $180 million of keeping facilities up to stuff. So again, those are obviously you guys are going to be dealing with that over the next several weeks, months, even years as board members. But I really do think that this November conversation you're going to have, is likely going to be a big influence on your discussion, because I don't think anybody knows where it is yet. And then whatever it is, I think we could be ready to do whatever you need to do, and getting into, and again, part of that encounter will have to be then. I mean, you have right now you have a pathway of facilities improvements that have roughly a $230 million price tag on them to maintain a level of condition that you'd like to maintain, to keep your capacity numbers, to keep your adequacy numbers to where you want them. So you have a pathway. So the answer is, which is nice to have, because the answer is if you decide that no bond is in your future, there's still a pathway to school improvement because you have a pathway. Now, how you fund it and how you prioritize it may change a little bit because of the amount of dollars coming in. But again, the first step to that is at least you have a roadmap to get to where you need to go to. And so regardless if there's an ask or not, the facility plan becomes more of a prioritization schedule for you, where we get the best educational outcomes with the dollars that we have to improve facilities. And so, again, that's what a bigger message I want to say is that this is never about a bond. This is really about how your facilities will continue to act as good resources for continuous educational outcomes. Because then you got 15 other things tacked along with that help with that. So this, and again, that's what I really want the message to be. This is a process if you decide to do it. This district has gone through 2.5 years of good planning to allow you tools that if you can't or won't or don't, then you still have tools to do what you need to do. And so it's actually an enviable position to be in. And because you know your guards, you know where you have to be and when you have to be there. Which puts you, again, I've told you before, puts you ahead of 80% of school districts in this country. So I think you're in a really good position from a planning standpoint to be able to go the pathway you decide to go.
We have about 7 minutes before we have to end this meeting,
I
so I just want to make sure everyone's focused on the whatever you want to make sure you address. We have 7 minutes to do that.
Oh, well, we're at the questions part. It's a very question.
Perfect.
I love the information that you provided. It's been very helpful. And I don't want to get into the details and the weeds of the actual plan, the actual facilities plan. But can I just ask a quick question? I apologize if it's off topic, but there was I can't remember if it was a teacher at West Middle School that brought it up again about West being closed, or are there plans to close West? That's in the plan, and I think that's one of those things that are really, it's starting to boil to the top, and it seems like people are a little apprehensive about that.
I think any one of those changes, you're going to get some apprehension, right?
Sure.
So that's why I wanted to have the information here for you, because ultimately, this is what the board gets to decide. What is the best pathway for the future of the Nampa School District? And though we have a facilities plan that has some recommendations, but ultimately you get to siphon through that.
And that's why I wanted to bring it up in an open meeting, because I know this is being recorded, because I do want people to understand that we're not closing any schools. There's no decision to do that. It is a plan. Mm-hmm. It can change. There are recommendations. We don't even know if we're going down this path yet. There's all these things. So I just want to, I don't know if that's going to alleviate any concerns, but it is a concern that had come up.
Sure.
More than once, so.
Yep. And then there's ongoing meetings as well as we've had to have with people as well to help say the same message.
Okay.
That, these are just the beginnings of a discussion that ultimately will come to a decision or not.
Right. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Or we're not taking any action right now. I just want to make sure everyone's on board with that.
I'm grateful for the preparation and for the people that we have putting this together so that we can understand.
Are you working with any other districts in Idaho at this point?
Not right now.
Okay,
not
so
right
you're
now.
not working with Bonneville schools? I know they're kind of fighting that $180 million.
There's a couple that, you've got a pretty
Twin
close school
Falls.
districts failed a couple times, and then Twins going after, Idaho Falls going after. I see like Idaho Falls, they're a great school district, and they're kind of hung up on an iconic high school discussion. I think it stands in their way. And I can see why.
Yeah.
But I do think that the other groups are, again, the clarification is that I know in Boise, we've done 2 with Boise, they've passed significantly, and they were all focused on outcomes. And those are good messages. And I think, again, Boise's been doing it a while, so that's a good model, I think, and they always have been. So.
Anything else?
I don't think so. Of course, we reserve the right if we have questions to email you a copy of our clerk, and we can get those out as cascading messages.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm happy to answer whatever you need.
You go back to the
Oh, yeah.
second slide for just a second. One that had the code on it.
Yep.
So that code's wrong. It's 74603. I thought I wrote it down wrong, but I wanted to let you know that it's the wrong
Okay,
code.
let me double check.
So if you're using it, just to
Let
make
me,
sure.
if I have to correct that, I pulled this right off the State School Board Association. So I will change it.
Yeah,
if that's
74603 is
Thank
what
you.
I believe it is.
I think it is.
Well, now you're gonna have to start all over again.
No, your quotes
Or thank you for letting me.
quotes are correct and everything.
Yeah,
but
that's
it's
weird
just
that I would
the
get
wrong
that.
code.
So,
I
will
thought I
definitely
had
make
the
that change.
typo,
Thank
so
you
I
for
wanted
that.
to make sure
So
before I
yours,
told
just
you.
so you know, that code is all about public records request. I looked it up at the
Yeah.
beginning, and that was a
Oh, good.
cascading
Thank
message
you.
to make sure I wasn't looking
Someone-
at the wrong document. I'm so glad you said that.
That's why it's good to have you back.
Yeah, I was
That is
so
good.
glad.
I do appreciate that. Yeah. That'd be a weird.
Well, I think
mistype for
people
me.
might see
Yeah,
it and
absolutely.
look it up
Sure.
and be like,
I'm
yeah,
gonna
what
make
is
that change
this up
before
to
he gets the
do?
final copy.
So,
And
yeah.
it literally is all about records.
Public
Yes.
record.
Public records request, just so you know, not sure.
So not
what it
far
is.
off, but
Yeah.
far enough off.
Yeah, so
There'll be some overlap.
literally, that's
Yeah,
what
I
I
do
said.
appreciate that.
Is
Thank you.
code, yeah.
Thank
so,
you so much for that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we are, if there's nothing else, we will adjourn this meeting.
Okay, I'm gonna use the restroom before we start the next one.